The next ideas are, and the two lectures will be on the 18th Amendment and Al Capone, continuing with the 1920s. So the 18th Amendment was ratified in 1919, and it declared the production, sale, and transport of alcohol illegal, which was a huge change in the culture of the United States, defined and created by this banning, basically, in all intents and purposes, a banning of alcohol in the United States. But a big problem arose out of this, and that would be the rise of American gangsters and an underground selling booze and drinking, and illegal bars started to sprout across the country. So this 18th Amendment banned alcohol and drinking in most cases and in most states. And then in every state, there was an underground growing of selling either bottles of alcohol to drink or secret bars, especially in areas like Chicago. There was a growth of, I mean, great, actually, the opposite effect happened after the amendment, and crime actually grew greatly in this era. Uh, Secret bars, clubs, many machine gun gang shootouts, and bribery of police in certain areas, all resulted during this period in the 1920s. So that was in 1919, and then went throughout the 1920s, the ban on alcohol. Al Capone is the next ID, and Al Capone was one of the most famous gangsters during this period of Prohibition that began with the 18th Amendment. Al Capone, born 1899 and died in 1947. Capone was an American gangster, Italian, became the biggest gangster leader in Chicago, and he became world famous. I mean, even now, if you travel in other countries, you mention Chicago, and sometimes they'll say, "Oh, that's Al Capone." Al Capone's from there, so he became quite well known and still is. But he also had many other competitors as a gangster. Uh, Irish gangsters were also moving in, and there was all kinds of shootouts between gangsters in the city. One of the most famous will be the next one. And one of the most famous shootouts and battles um, was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, which was when Capone took out uh, the Bugs Moran gang and took them out on St. Valentine's Day. And that became Chicago news headlines, but also world news. It was one of many incidents that occurred during the era. And But in spite of that, no a court case could bring uh, down, even when they tried to charge Capone, because he had bribed police or terrified jurors or bribed judges or used fear. He could not be convicted of any of the crimes, even though everyone knew that he was behind them. The most famous lawman of the era was Eliot Ness, also known as part of the Untouchables. And Eliot Ness was main mission was to bring down Capone. And eventually, Capone did get taken down. But basically, on a technicality, they went after him for income tax evasion. And there's a federal trial, and he was convicted of tax evasion. and died in prison, and that was the end of the era of Al Capone.